Maya's sneakers squeaked against the polished concrete floor as she pushed through the heavy glass doors of Blackwood Academy's archery facility. The sharp scent of leather and wood polish hit her immediately, mixed with something else, tension, thick as morning fog. She clutched the acceptance letter in her sweaty palm, the paper now wrinkled from her nervous fidgeting during the 2-hour bus ride from downtown. The range stretched before her like a cathedral of precision. Fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across 20 individual shooting lanes, each marked with crisp white lines that seemed to mock her limited vision. At the far end, colorful targets hung like silent sentinels, their concentric circles blurring together in Maya's peripheral vision. She squinted, trying to make out the details. When a sharp whistle cut through the air, the arrow materialized from nowhere, a deadly blur that grazed her left ear before embedding itself in the drywall with a violent thunk. Bits of plaster rained down on her shoulder as Maya stumbled backward, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Eyes open!" The voice exploded across the range like a gunshot, causing every student to freeze mid-draw. This isn't some Zen meditation retreat. Maya's head snapped toward the source of the fury. Instructor Kane stood 30 feet away, his weathered face twisted into a mask of barely controlled rage. He was smaller than she'd expected from his legendary reputation, but his presence filled the entire space. Olympic medals hung from his neck like battle trophies, catching the fluorescent light as his chest heaved with indignation. His steel-gray hair was cropped military short, and his eyes cold as January rain locked onto Maya with predatory focus. "You!" Kane's finger shot out like an accusation. "New girl. What's the first rule of range safety?" Maya's mouth went dry. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward her, and she could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down like a physical force. The other students looked like they'd stepped out of an athletic magazine, perfect posture, expensive equipment, the casual confidence that came from years of privilege and success. I'm sorry, I didn't. Awareness. Kane's voice ricocheted off the walls. Constant, unwavering awareness of your surroundings. You walk onto my range like you're strolling through a park, completely oblivious to live weapons being fired. He began stalking toward her, his footsteps echoing ominously. "What's your name?" "Maya Chen." Her voice came out as barely a whisper. "Speak up. This isn't a library." "Maya Chen," she repeated, louder this time, hating how her voice cracked. Kane stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath and see the network of scars across his knuckles. "Well, Maya Chen, welcome to Blackwood Academy, where we separate the archers from the wannabes. You see that target down there?" He pointed toward the far end of the range, where a standard target face hung like a colorful bullseye. Maya squinted, trying to bring the distant circles into focus. The target seemed to shimmer and blur, the lines between colors bleeding together like watercolors in rain. "Yes, sir." "Good, because that's going to be your best friend for the next hour. Or your worst enemy, depending on how badly you embarrass yourself." Kane grabbed a recurve bow from the equipment rack and thrust it into Maya's trembling hands. The weapon felt alien and dangerous, heavier than she'd expected. "Everyone else, continue your practice. Let's see what our scholarship student can do." The words "scholarship student" dripped with disdain, and Maya felt heat creep up her neck. She'd worked 3 part-time jobs to afford the application fee alone, spending months convincing her mother that archery could be her ticket to college. Now, standing in this temple of privilege with Kane's contempt washing over her, those dreams felt impossibly naive. "I should mention," Maya began hesitantly, "I have some visual. I don't want to hear about your problems." Kane cut her off with surgical precision. "I want to see solutions. Archery is about precision, not excuses. You either hit the target or you don't. There's No participation trophy for trying hard. Maya's fingers fumbled with the bow as she tried to remember the basic stance she'd practiced in her bedroom mirror. She'd watched countless YouTube videos, studied every technique guide she could find online, but nothing had prepared her for the weight of real equipment or the pressure of performing under Kane's withering stare. Feet shoulder-width apart, Kane barked, circling her like a shark. Draw arms straight, bow arms steady. And for God's sake, keep your eyes on the target. Maya knocked an arrow with shaking hands, the fletching tickling her fingers. She raised the bow, trying to align the sight pin with the distant target, but the colors kept swimming together. Her partial vision, manageable in most daily situations, became a glaring disability under the harsh range lights. Any day now, Chen. She drew the string back, feeling the bow's resistance fight against her untrained muscles. The side picture wavered as she tried to find the target through the peep sight. Everything looked wrong, too bright, too blurry, too far away. In desperation, she closed her eyes for just a moment, trying to center herself the way she did when navigating crowded hallways at her old school. What are you doing? Kane's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Did you just close your eyes? Maya's eyes snapped open. You were just what? Taking a power nap? This is archery, not nap time. Kane's voice rose again, drawing snickers from the other students. The target is that way, in case you forgot. Humiliation burned through Maya's chest as she tried to aim again. The bow felt impossibly heavy now, her arms shaking with fatigue and nerves. She could hear whispered comments from the other students. Is she serious? How did she even get in here? This is painful to watch. Release when ready, Kane said, his tone suggesting he expected nothing but failure. Maya let go. The arrow sailed high and wide, disappearing somewhere into the foam backstop with a muffled thud. Not even close to the target. Outstanding, Kane said with mock enthusiasm, slow clapping. Truly inspiring. Let's try that again, shall we? And this time, maybe try keeping your eyes open for the entire shot sequence. Revolutionary concept, I know. The second arrow went low, skittering across the floor. The third veered left so dramatically, it nearly hit the lane divider. With each miss, Kane's commentary grew more cutting, and the other students' amusement more obvious. Tell me, Chen, Kane said after her fifth consecutive miss. What exactly made you think you belonged in an elite archery program? Did you perhaps confuse us with a summer camp for the visually impaired? Maya's face burned with shame, but something deeper stirred beneath the humiliation. A stubborn spark of defiance that had carried her through years of being underestimated. She thought about her mother working double shifts to support her dreams. About the scholarship letter that had felt like winning the lottery. I can do this, she said quietly, more to herself than to Kane. What was that? I said I can do this. Louder now, meeting his cold stare. Kane's smile was razor-sharp. We'll see about that, won't we? Class dismissed everyone. Except you, Chen. You're going to stay here until you hit that target, even if it takes all night. As the other students filed out, their expensive gear bags slung over their shoulders, Maya stood alone in the echoing range with Kane's challenge hanging in the air like smoke. The target seemed impossibly far away, a colorful mockery of her ambitions, but she picked up another arrow anyway. Continue. The next morning arrived like a death sentence. Maya had barely slept, her dreams filled with whistling arrows and Kane's mocking laughter. She'd managed exactly 3 hits on the target's outer white ring before Kane finally released her the previous evening, each success feeling more like luck than skill. Now, walking back into the range, she felt the familiar knot of dread tightening in her stomach. Kane was already there, of course, arranging equipment with military precision. He looked up as she entered, and his smile was the kind predators wore before striking. Ah, Our star pupil returns, he announced to the assembling class. I trust you spent the evening practicing your unique technique. The other students snickered as they claimed their usual spots. Maya recognized the social hierarchy immediately. The elite shooters commanded the center lanes, while newer students were relegated to the edges. She found herself assigned to Lane 2, directly in Kane's line of sight, positioned like a specimen under a microscope. Today, we're working on consistency, Kane declared, his voice carrying across the range. Real archers don't rely on luck or alternative methods. His eyes found Maya's. They rely on proven fundamentals: sight alignment, breathing control, and most importantly, he paused for dramatic effect, keeping their eyes on the target. Maya felt 20 pairs of eyes turn toward her. Heat crept up her neck as she realized Kane had orchestrated this moment, positioning her as the day's cautionary tale. Chen, since you're our newest addition, why don't you demonstrate proper shooting form for the class? It wasn't a request. Maya stepped up to the shooting line, acutely aware of every whisper, every sideways glance. The bow felt even heavier today, as if it had absorbed her failures from the night before. Remember, everyone, Kane continued, his voice taking on the tone of a nature documentary narrator. Archery is a visual sport. We aim with our eyes, not our feelings. More snickers rippled through the group. Maya knocked an arrow, trying to block out the commentary. She raised the bow, squinting through the sight at the distant target. The fluorescent lights seemed brighter today, creating a harsh glare that made the target's colors bleed together like a watercolor painting left in the rain. Adjust your sight picture, Chen, Kane barked. Read the wind flags. What did they tell you about conditions? Maya's eyes darted to the small fabric indicators hanging from the ceiling. They hung limp in the still air, but she couldn't make out their subtle movements from this distance. Everything beyond 30 feet became a blur of shapes and colors, details lost in the fog of her limited vision. The wind seems calm, she ventured. Seems? Kane's voice dripped with disdain. Archery isn't about seems. It's about precision observation. Look again. Maya strained her eyes, trying to discern movement in the distant flags. The effort made her head throb, and she instinctively closed her eyes for a moment, seeking relief from the visual chaos. What did I just see? Kane's voice exploded across the range like a thunderclap. Did you just close your eyes again? The range fell silent, except for the hum of fluorescent lights. Maya's eyes snapped open to find Kane striding toward her, his face a mask of theatrical outrage. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, spreading his arms wide like a ringmaster. Witness the revolutionary Chen technique. Step 1. Ignore the target completely. Step 2. Close your eyes and hope for the best. His voice rose to a crescendo. Perhaps we should all try shooting blindfolded. Maybe we've been doing this wrong for thousands of years. Laughter erupted from the other students, not the nervous chuckles of yesterday, but genuine amusement at the spectacle Kane was creating. Maya felt herself shrinking, becoming smaller with each wave of mockery. Tell me, Chen, Kane continued, now standing directly beside her. Do you plan to compete in the Paralympics? Because that's the only venue where your creative approach might be considered acceptable. I wasn't, Maya began, but Kane cut her off with a raised hand. No excuses. Show us this mystical technique of yours. Close your eyes and demonstrate how sound alone can guide an arrow to its target. He gestured grandly to the class. Everyone gather around. This should be educational. The students formed a semicircle behind Maya, their expensive equipment abandoned as they prepared to witness her humiliation. She could hear their whispered comments. This is so awkward. Why doesn't she just quit? I feel bad for her, but seriously. Maya's hands trembled as she drew the bowstring back. Kane had positioned a spotlight directly behind her, its harsh beam creating a glare that made the target completely invisible to her limited vision. She was trapped, unable to see, unable to escape, unable to do anything but fail publicly. "Any day now," Kane said, his voice honey-sweet with false patience. "We're all waiting to witness this miracle of acoustic archery." Maya closed her eyes, not out of choice, but out of desperation. The spotlight's glare was unbearable, and her head pounded from the strain of trying to see what simply wasn't there. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she tried to remember the target's position, tried to feel the bow's alignment, tried to find some center in the chaos of her humiliation. She released. The arrow sailed wide, embedding itself in the foam padding with a distant thunk. The silence that followed was somehow worse than laughter. "Remarkable," Kane said, slow clapping. "Truly groundbreaking technique. I'm sure the Olympic Committee will be fascinated by your innovations." He turned to address the class. "This, everyone, is why we stick to proven methods. Archery is a sport of precision, not wishful thinking." But Kane wasn't finished. He tasted blood, and like any predator, he pressed his advantage. "Chen, I have an announcement to make," he said, his voice carrying across the range with ominous authority. "The parent showcase is in 2 weeks. It's our opportunity to demonstrate the excellence that Blackwood Academy represents." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "And you, my dear student, will be our featured demonstration." Maya's blood turned to ice. "Sir, I don't think—" "Nonsense. False modesty doesn't suit you." Kane's smile was razor-sharp. "You'll demonstrate proper shooting technique for our distinguished guest parents, donors, board members. Unless, of course, you plan to embarrass us all by shooting blind?" The trap was perfect, and Maya saw it clearly now. Kane had maneuvered her into an impossible position. Refuse, and she'd be labeled a coward. Accept, and she'd face public humiliation in front of the Academy's most important supporters. Maya's voice caught in her throat. "Wonderful. It's settled then." Kane clapped his hands together with finality. 2 weeks, Chen. I suggest you spend that time practicing with your eyes open. We wouldn't want our guests to think we're running some sort of alternative program here." As the class resumed their practice, Maya stood frozen at the shooting line, the weight of her impending doom settling over her like a shroud. Around her, arrows flew with mechanical precision, each one a reminder of her own inadequacy. But in the depths of her despair, something unexpected stirred. Kane's mocking words echoed in her mind, "shooting blind." He'd meant it as the ultimate insult, the final proof of her incompetence. He had no idea he'd just given her the key to everything. Maya picked up another arrow, her hand steadier now. 2 weeks. She had 2 weeks to turn Kane's mockery into her salvation. The game was far from over. The janitor's key felt like stolen fire in Maya's palm as she slipped through the Academy's side entrance at 11:47 p.m. Mrs. Chen had handed it to her that afternoon with a conspiratorial wink, whispering, "Buildings empty after 10. Security cameras loop every hour on the hour. You'll have 58 minutes of invisibility." Maya had spent the day researching everything she could about blind archery, discovering a hidden world of athletes who competed without sight. But more importantly, she'd found something else: historical accounts of ancient archers who hunted in complete darkness, relying on sound and instinct rather than vision. If they could do it centuries ago with primitive equipment, maybe she could too. The archery range lay in darkness, emergency lighting casting eerie shadows across the empty lanes. Maya made her way to her usual spot, Lane 2, where Kane had positioned her for maximum humiliation. Tonight, this would be her laboratory. She brought her own equipment, a basic recurve bow purchased with her last paycheck from the coffee shop, along with a dozen aluminum arrows. Nothing fancy, but it was hers. No more borrowing academy equipment that felt foreign in her hands. Maya set up in complete darkness, not even bothering with the emergency lights. If she was going to master shooting blind, she needed to embrace the darkness completely. She knocked her first arrow and drew the string back, feeling the familiar resistance. But instead of immediately aiming, she stopped. Listened. The range wasn't silent. She just never noticed the symphony before. The building's Vega system hummed with a low, steady rhythm. Somewhere in the distance, a clock ticked with metronomic precision. The target paper rustled almost imperceptibly in the air currents created by the ventilation system. Maya closed her eyes and drew the bow again. This time, she focused entirely on the sounds. The target was 60 feet away. She knew that from the range markers. But could she hear it? She released. The arrow whispered through the air, and she heard it strike, not the satisfying thunk of hitting the target face, but the duller sound of foam padding. A miss, but she'd heard exactly where it landed. Interesting, she murmured to herself. For the next hour, Maya shot arrow after arrow into the darkness, each time listening more carefully to the subtle audio cues. She began to notice patterns. Arrows that hit the target face made a distinctly different sound than those that struck the foam backing. The paper rustled differently when struck dead-on versus at an angle. Even the fletching created different whispers depending on the arrow's trajectory. By 1 a.m., she was hitting the target consistently, though nowhere near the center. But she was learning the language of sound that Kane had unknowingly introduced her to. The next night, she returned with a new strategy. Maya had spent the day mapping the range acoustically during regular hours, noting how sounds bounced off walls, how the target stands creaked almost inaudibly in the air currents, how even her own heartbeat affected her hearing. She'd also made a discovery that changed everything. During lunch, while other students practiced, Maya had noticed that the target faces weren't uniform. The bullseye was made of different paper than the outer rings, slightly thicker, with a different texture. When struck, it produced a subtly different tone. Tonight, she tested this theory. Standing in the darkness, Maya drew her bow and aimed purely by sound. She developed a mental map of the range, using the steady hum of the ventilation system as her North Star. The target hung slightly to the left of the main air vent, and she could hear the paper's gentle movement in the artificial breeze. Her arrow flew true, and the sound it made upon impact was different, sharper, more resonant. She'd hit the target face, somewhere in the scoring rings. "Yes," she whispered, pumping her fist in the darkness. But Maya wasn't alone. "Impressive," came a voice from the shadows near the entrance. Maya spun around, her heart hammering. A figure emerged from the darkness, Mrs. Chen, the night security guard, her weathered face creased with curiosity rather than anger. "Mrs. Chen, I can explain. No need, child." The older woman approached slowly, her flashlight pointed at the floor rather than Maya's eyes. "I've been watching you for 20 minutes. What you're doing, it's remarkable." Maya's shoulders sagged with relief. "You're not going to report me?" Mrs. Chen chuckled, a warm sound in the cold range. "Report you for what? Practicing? Learning? Discovering something that pompous instructor never bothered to teach?" She shook her head. "I've worked here for 15 years, watched Kane crush more dreams than I can count. But you're different. Different how? You're not trying to beat the system, you're creating your own." Mrs. Chen walked over to the target, examining Maya's arrows clustered in the outer rings. "My grandfather was a hunter in rural China. He used to tell stories about archers who could hit rabbits in complete darkness, guided only by sound and instinct. I thought they were just tailies until tonight." Maya felt a surge of validation. "You really think this could work?" "I think Kane has no idea what he's unleashed." Mrs. Chen's eyes twinkled with mischief. "That man needs to learn some humility. and you might just be the one to teach it to him. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a full set of keys. Building's yours every night until midnight. I'll make sure the cameras stay on their loop, and I'll keep the emergency lighting off in here. But Maya, her expression grew serious. What you're attempting, it's not just about proving Kane wrong. You're pioneering something new. Don't let that responsibility weigh too heavily on you. Over the following nights, Maya's technique evolved rapidly. She learned to read the microsounds of the range like a musician reading sheet music. The slight whistle of air through the target stand's mounting brackets told her about wind direction. The different tones produced by arrows striking various parts of the target face became her scoring system. She could even hear the subtle difference between a shot that would score an 8 versus a 9. But the real breakthrough came on her 5th night of secret practice. Maya had been struggling with consistency hitting the target regularly, but unable to group her shots tightly. Frustrated, she sat in the darkness and tried to understand what was missing. That's when she heard it, her own breathing, loud and irregular in the silence. Every time she held her breath to shoot, her heart rate spiked, affecting her stability. But when she learned to breathe steadily, timing her release with her natural respiratory rhythm, everything changed. Her next 6 arrows clustered in the gold rings, each one guided by a symphony of sounds only she could hear. Maya stood in the darkness, surrounded by the evidence of her transformation. In less than a week, she'd gone from Kane's favorite target for humiliation to something he couldn't possibly understand. An archer who had transcended the limitations of sight. The parent showcase was still a week away, but Maya was no longer afraid. Kane had set a trap, intending to destroy her in front of the Academy's most important supporters. He had no idea he'd given her the perfect stage for a revolution. As she packed up her equipment, Maya smiled in the darkness. Let Kane bring his spotlights, his mockery, his absolute certainty that archery required perfect vision. She would show him and everyone else that sometimes the most profound truths could only be found in the dark. The Blackwood Academy Gymnasium had been transformed into an elegant showcase venue. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over polished hardwood floors, while silk banners displaying the school's achievements hung from the rafters like battle standards. Round tables draped in academy colors hosted the elite board members in tailored suits. Wealthy parents clutching champagne flutes, and potential donors whose checkbooks could determine the school's future. Maya stood in the equipment room, her hands steady despite the magnitude of what lay ahead. Through the partially open door, she could hear the murmur of conversation, the clink of glasses, and Kane's booming voice as he worked the crowd like a seasoned politician. Ladies and gentlemen, Kane's amplified voice carried across the gymnasium. Tonight you'll witness the precision and excellence that defines Blackwood Academy archery. Our students represent the finest tradition of Olympic-level training. Maya adjusted her simple black outfit, a stark contrast to the elaborate academy uniforms the other students wore. Mrs. Chen had helped her choose it, explaining that sometimes the most powerful statements came from simplicity. Her bow, still the basic recurve she'd bought with her coffee shop wages, felt like an extension of her body now. "You ready for this, child?" Mrs. Chen appeared beside her, wearing her security uniform but with an unmistakable gleam of anticipation in her eyes. "As ready as I'll ever be." Maya's voice was calm, centered. The nervous girl who'd stumbled into the range 3 weeks ago was gone, replaced by someone who had discovered her own unique form of mastery. Through the doorway, they watched Kane orchestrate the evening's demonstrations. Advanced students performed flawlessly, their arrows clustering in tight groups while parents applauded politely. Each performance was technically perfect, mechanically precise, and utterly predictable. "And now," Kane announced, his voice taking on a theatrical quality, "we have a special demonstration. One of our newer students will show us the importance of proper fundamentals and traditional techniques. Maya felt the familiar flutter of anticipation, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was the same feeling she imagined a pianist might have before performing a piece no one had ever heard before. She walked into the gymnasium, and conversations gradually died as people noticed her approach. Unlike the other students who have been introduced with lengthy recitations of their achievements, Maya received no fanfare. She was simply the scholarship student in Kane's dismissive introduction. The shooting line had been set up at one end of the gymnasium, with targets positioned at the regulation 70 meters. Portable lighting rigs illuminated the range with television-quality brightness, ensuring every shot would be visible to the assembled crowd. Miss Chen will demonstrate the shooting sequence we've been working on, Kane announced, his tone suggesting he expected nothing but failure. Proper stance, sight alignment, and most importantly, maintaining visual focus on the target. Maya took her position at the shooting line, acutely aware of 200 pairs of eyes watching her every movement. She could hear whispered conversations. Is that the girl who... I heard she has vision problems. Why would they showcase her? She knocked her first arrow, drew the bow, and aimed through the sight at the distant target. Under the harsh lights, the target was nothing but a blur of colors, completely invisible to her limited vision. She held the position for a moment, letting the crowd see her struggle with the conventional approach. The arrow sailed wide, missing the target entirely. Polite applause rippled through the crowd, the kind reserved for valiant failures. Kane's smile was triumphant as he stepped forward. As you can see, archery requires precise visual coordination, he began, launching into what was clearly a prepared speech about the importance of proper training and natural ability. But Maya wasn't listening. She was calculating. Mr. Kane, she interrupted, her voice carrying clearly across the gymnasium. I'd like to try something different. Kane paused mid-sentence, clearly annoyed by the interruption. Miss Chen, we've discussed this. Proper technique requires. I understand, Maya said calmly. But I'd like to demonstrate an alternative approach. With your permission, of course. The crowd stirred with interest. This wasn't part of the planned program, and the deviation from script created an electric tension in the air. Kane's eyes narrowed. He sensed a trap, but couldn't identify it. What exactly are you proposing? Maya turned to address the crowd directly, her voice steady and clear. Archery has ancient roots. Long before modern sights and perfect lighting, archers hunted and fought in darkness, relying on senses beyond vision. I'd like to demonstrate that technique. A murmur ran through the assembled guests. This was unexpected, intriguing. Kane's face flushed red. Miss Chen, this is not the time for experimental. I think it sounds fascinating, interrupted a voice from the crowd. Maya recognized him as Dr. Harrison, the Academy's board chairman and a major donor. Please, continue. Maya nodded gratefully. Mrs. Chen, would you mind controlling the lights? Mrs. Chen moved to the lighting controls with barely concealed glee. Of course, dear. Wait just a minute, Kane sputtered, realizing he was losing control of his carefully orchestrated evening. This is highly irregular. Our guests came to see proper archery technique, not some parlor trick. Actually, Dr. Harrison interjected, I think we'd all be quite interested to see this demonstration. Please proceed, Miss Chen. Maya felt the shift in the room's energy. What had begun as her planned humiliation was transforming into something else entirely, a moment of genuine curiosity and anticipation. Thank you, she said simply. Mrs. Chen, if you would. The lights died. The gymnasium plunged into complete darkness, and the crowd gasped collectively. In the blackness, Maya heard everything with crystalline clarity. The rustle of expensive clothing, nervous laughter, whispered questions, and underneath it all, the subtle sounds that had become her navigation system. She knocked another arrow, drew the bow, and closed her eyes. Not that it mattered in the darkness. The target was 70 meters away, invisible to everyone in the room. But Maya could hear it, the gentle whisper of paper moving in the air currents, the almost inaudible creak of the target stand. The way sound bounced differently off the target face than the surrounding foam dot. The gymnasium fell silent except for the collective breathing of 200 people. Maya drew the bowstring to her anchor point, feeling the familiar tension, the perfect balance of the bow in her hands. She listened to the symphony of sounds that had become her world, finding the target not with her eyes, but with senses Kane had never bothered to develop. She released. The arrow's flight was silent to most ears, but Maya heard its whisper through the darkness, heard the moment of impact, the sharp, clean sound of arrow meeting bullseye. "Lights," she called softly. The gymnasium blazed back to life, and 200 people turned as one toward the distant target. Maya's arrow sat dead center in the gold ring, a perfect bullseye that would have been impressive under any circumstances but seemed miraculous given the conditions. The silence stretched for an eternal moment before erupting into thunderous applause. People rose from their seats, champagne glasses forgotten, as they processed what they'd just witnessed. Kane stood frozen, his face cycling through disbelief, rage, and something that might have been fear. His carefully constructed world of absolutes, that archery required perfect vision, that his methods were the only path to success, lay shattered around him, like broken glass. Maya opened her eyes and looked directly at him, her expression calm and centered. "Sometimes," she said quietly, her words carrying clearly in the sudden hush, "the most important targets can only be hit when we stop trying to see them." The revolution had begun.